Welcome to a session on collaborative couples therapy. I'm Dr. Richard Long. Today we're going to talk about the task of a collaborative therapist. We're going to talk about who developed the approach. I'll provide you with a consultation session and fill you in on what we're talking about, what we mean by a consultation session, and then we'll talk about some questions for discussion after you've taken a look at the clip. Let's begin by talking about the task of a collaborative therapist. One of the first things a collaborative therapist needs to do is to find the voice of the other partner. The idea here is that they're coming in with something that's unexpressed, and your job as a therapist is to help give that voice expression. The other thing you want to do is turn those fights into intimate conversations. The couple came in, they're saying we fight too much, and they're saying one of the things that we want to have happen here is we want to be able to talk with each other, and that's the task of a collaborative therapist, to leave them with the impression that they know how to talk rather than they know how to fight. The other idea here in terms of a task is to create a perspective in which they're able to get above the fight and recognize what's underneath that and begin to talk about that as opposed to those surface kinds of issues. The next task is really a difficult one, and that is, as a therapist, your challenge is to provide empathy with the partner as a therapist you like least. The idea here is to recognize that something is happening, and that something that's happening is that you're creating an enemy in that room, and you need to do something to make yourself a friend. And that means that you empathize with the person who's having the most difficulty with you, or that you're having the most difficulty with as a therapist. And finally, your work is to get them to understand that you're a consultant to that marriage. This is not your marriage. It's a marriage in which you're able to observe it, you're able to talk about it, you're able to get them to talk about it, but it's not your marriage, and you need to provide a little bit of distance, a little bit of objectivity, and help them take a look at what's going on there. The approach was developed by Dr. Dan Weil, and here's a photo of Dr. Weil. It's based on ego analysis developed by Dr. Bernard Applebaum. Dr. Weil has a private practice in Oakland, California. He's a clinical psychologist. And one of the things that he does there is that he provides a lot of workshops for professionals who want to learn how to do the work. He's also an author of a book, and you'll see a jacket cover coming up there in a second. One of his books is After the Honeymoon, How Conflict Can Improve the Relationship. He also has another book, Couples Therapy, a non-traditional approach, and you see that jacket cover. And then one of the things that also goes on with Dr. Weil is that he has a DVD, and you'll see the jacket cover for one of his DVDs. What I want to talk about next is a consultation session. In this consultation session, and you're going to take a look at it in a minute, what you'll see is a couple. They're in a role play. Role play was written by a therapist in the group. I'm the therapist. Dr. Weil is the consultant. The couple comes in and they're talking about a long-distance relationship. Essentially, she's at a position where she says to him, hey, I want more of your time. And he says, you know what? I've got to answer that telephone. I'm expected to answer that telephone 24/7, and I feel a lot of pressure from you every time you're in town with that kind of a request. So the issue is for me as a therapist to see if we can get above that level and get to something higher in terms of a perspective and get the couple to a place where they can have an elegant conversation as opposed to a fight about what's going on. Now, as you take a look at what's going on, I want you to raise some questions and begin to jot down on a sheet of paper some of those answers. So if you will, and these will pop up on the screen in a second, essentially one of the first questions is, what sort of counseling skills do you see the therapist using? Second question is, there's a turning point in the session. What is that turning point? How would you describe it? What do you notice the therapist doing? And what are your reflections on what's the impact of what you see the therapist doing on the clients? The other thing that I'd like you to pay attention to is this relationship between therapist and consultant. You see occasionally I'll have a conversation with Dr. Weil. I want you to kind of notice that relationship and jot down some observations about what do you see in that therapist-consulting relationship. Next question really has to do with a fit, and I'm asking you in this case to think about when you consider this particular approach, where would you say it's best fit? What kind of clients would it work with? What kind of issues would it work with? And the next question is really the question about a misfit. Where would you say this particular approach really would not be a good fit? That is, when you think of yourself doing this work, you say to yourself, you know what, I really don't see that applicable to that particular client population. And then finally, I want you to back up a little bit and think about yourself and think about yourself as a person who needs some additional training. And I want you to think about what would lead you to say, this is a particular model that you'd like to learn more about. And I want you to consider what might get you to a place where you say, you know what, I think I want to learn more about this particular approach. So that concludes the intro to this particular session, in which essentially what we've talked about are the task of a collaborative couples therapist. We've talked about who developed the approach. We've talked about a consultation session. And we've talked about some questions for discussion. Thank you for joining me. We've had a session in which we focused on collaborative couples therapy, and I'm Dr. Richard Long.